modified language from Lydia X.E. Brown's accessibility statement. Lydia X.E. Brown is a big disability advocate, and they teach a course. And so I really enjoy their accessibility statement. And so we have modified it for this, but we want to put forth an invocation so that everyone can come to this conference as comfortable as possible in themselves, in their bodies, in their minds, and in the needs that they carry with them. So often we are expected to believe that there's only one right way to exist in the space. Let us use this conference as an opportunity to listen to our fellow community members and ourselves to create an inclusive experience with many right ways of existing. And so the prompt for all of you that I'm also going to paste into the chat is take a moment to think and share if desired. And you can share this out loud or in the chat. What are you bringing into this presentation right now? So not the conference, but like today. And then is there any way as a community we can support you during this presentation? All right. It's been 10 seconds, and hearing that Nona shared, I'm assuming that all of our needs are met in this moment. But if that changes throughout the presentation, please feel free to take care of your needs, whether that's turning off your cameras, walking away. If you're unmuting and your dog is barking, you don't need to apologize for that. We are all here, and we all understand that we're coming in different ways. And I personally, if I'm sharing my own needs, appreciate that you're all going to be patient with me as I get distracted by chats and potentially other things that are happening. We're working on calming ourselves right now. So next slide. Today's intention, we want to commit to making accessibility and inclusion a shared community responsibility during the WAEE annual conference. Because again, for too long, accessibility has been the concern of the people being impacted by inaccessibility. And we want to make sure that all of us as presenters, we have the power to set the tone of the conference, and we want to come together to make this conference accessible. And so just the agenda, we're gonna share some accessibility considerations for slideshows, discussions, field trips, and outdoor sessions. We're also gonna share some of the stuff WAEE is committed to doing in supporting you all, and we'll have chance for a Q&A and discussion. And so thinking about slideshow accessibility, there's some things out there. Closed captions can be a really great accessibility consideration. And a lot of people don't necessarily know how to turn on closed captions. And so this slide, we're just gonna talk about how to turn on closed captions. I also think it's important to recognize some of the limitations of automatic closed captions in PowerPoint or Google Slide, right? If you're doing a presentation and you're really close to your computer, it might pick up on some of your words, but if you're wandering around the room, it won't necessarily pick up all of those words that you are saying. Also, even the best automatic closed captions are only probably about 75% accurate. And so if someone is relying on captions, it might not necessarily meet their needs, but closed captions can be helpful if someone's getting distracted and trying to come back to the moment, if the room is really echoey. And so it can be important to try. The accessibility or the closed caption instructions are in the description of this PowerPoint that will be shared as well. But I just Googled how to set up closed captions in PowerPoint, and it gets you to this page on their website. And so under your slideshow settings of PowerPoint, you can turn on the subtitle settings. And the default setting is below the slide. So if you're making your presentation, it'll come down below. Depending on the room you're in, you might want to change that to be above your slide because low might get blocked by someone. And then for Google Slides, you should be able to watch me do this, but I can click these buttons right here, click caption preferences, and I can turn them on, and they should start to show up. My preferences, I've already changed it to the top because I know usually in presentations that is the most helpful. And I made the text size quite large. The pro of that is in big rooms, they are easier to see. The con of that is they don't stay up there for very long. And so it potentially is hard for people to read them and stay on top of the captions. And so if I made them medium size, they would stay up for longer, and that might help people up. And so potentially you could set captions and be like, hey, show of hands, who would like them smaller, who would like them bigger, and try to work them out like that. As you can see right now, they are pretty accurate. And the reason I would say they're so accurate is because I'm actually using a microphone. That helps. Again, in big rooms, it might not work as well. And so sometimes I even give presentations at conferences wearing this headset. Um, so it's just some things to consider, but it's beneficial potentially to turn on closed captions. It might at some point, closed captions might become a distraction if they're so inaccurate because you're far away. They can sometimes say really funny things, which can distract people. So I'm gonna turn these captions off because we're in Zoom and everyone can turn their own captions on if they would prefer them on or off. So, and that's actually the last example in the speaker notes is sometimes if I'm doing a presentation in a different way, like maybe through Canva or maybe just showing random PDFs I have, sometimes I'll start a Zoom meeting with myself and turn on the Zoom captions as a way to get captions up for people. And here's just some best practices with closed captions. This first one I know I struggle with a lot, but you want to speak slower. You also want to practice ahead of time to catch mistakes. Certain things, if we're talking about technical stuff, the captions might not be able to figure that out. And so potentially you can say it in a way the captions will understand, or you have to explain that word. So when Amy and I, who's one of my coworkers, do presentations on biotechnology, we know there are just certain words that the captions will not figure out. And then this one is good for closed captions, but also just good in general. If people are making comments, like you're like, does anyone have any questions? And someone in the back of the room says something, it's helpful to repeat those comments so the captions can pick them up or people can hear what's going on. Slide formatting. So another very helpful thing. We want to make sure we're having consistency, high contrast, large fonts and simple backgrounds, and we want to use the notes section. So a lot of people like to make really beautiful PowerPoints. However, for some people that becomes really distracting or it's hard to read or they don't quite understand when we're moving on to a new topic. And so this presentation isn't very pretty, but it is set up in a way that's very consistent and hopefully helpful to folks. And then the notes section is only helpful and necessary if you're going to be sharing the PowerPoint out. But a lot of people at presentations are like, oh, I'll share the PowerPoint later, and then they share it and there's nothing in the notes and you're like, I don't remember what was happening on that slide. The shared PowerPoint isn't helpful for me. So yes, and now we're going to move on to discussion accessibility. So before I move on, does anyone have questions or comments about making accessible presentations and visuals? All right then. Victoria has a question.
I do. Rachel, what about using like interactive elements during a presentation, like a QR code on your PowerPoint to gather information or like a poll everywhere? Any thoughts or comments on that type of technology integrated?
Sorry, I'm writing notes. QR code and poll everywhere. Because maybe that's something we can update before the next presentation. I know when I'm designing PowerPoints, interactive elements, I always debate about. They can help people get engaged, right? And so that could be really great. However, you might be working with people who don't have smartphones or who don't necessarily know how those different things work, depending on maybe they can't scan a QR code even if they have a device capable of it. And so there are some pros and cons there. I would say, though, if you want to use that stuff, use it, but think about how someone who cannot use it would still participate. So sometimes what I will do if I'm doing like a poll everywhere is I will say, if you cannot get into this poll everywhere because your phone's not connecting, yell your answer out at me and I'll type it in for you so your voice can still be part of the process. Or if I have a QR code, I'll also say, hey, come up here and I will email you the presentation later, or I have printed versions of what's in that QR code. So trying to figure out how people can have different choices to access that stuff. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Victoria. I'm going to add that in later. So discussion accessibility. Most people know that sharing norms for participation, sharing goals for discussion, and establishing ground rules can be super helpful. However, at a conference, sometimes those are hard to do because you have, I don't know, 50 minutes and you did a 45-minute presentation and you're trying to have a 5-minute conversation. And so as facilitators, sometimes we don't have the opportunity to explicitly say these, and we instead are modeling some of this behavior. But best practice, if possible, is to explicitly state some of these things. And so if we think about outlining norms for participation, I tried to model that today where I said, hey, if you need to take care of your needs, feel free to stand up, feel free to turn off your camera, but just really thinking about how people can be in the space. Do we also want people to raise their hands if they're in the discussion, or can we just like share thoughts out loud? Sharing thoughts out loud might benefit people who speak faster or think faster. And so do we want different ways to get into that discussion? And then at the beginning of the discussion, when we're sharing goals for the discussion, you might have to say, hey, this is a short discussion, 5 minutes. I will not have time for everyone to bring their voice or thoughts into this space. I'd be happy to talk to you later. Or you might share, I would like everyone to have a chance to speak, so you all can only speak once or whatever. And so thinking about some of those things, a question I would pose to you are, again, are there ways for people to participate without talking? Victoria already brought up the poll everywhere can be a way for everyone to voices to get in to like a discussion or interactive activity without necessarily speaking. Sharing the goals for the discussion can be some of the things I've said, like how are we raising hands, things like that, but it can also help guide the discussion. So some discussions I will say, hey, for this discussion, the prompt is to think about how to incorporate climate change into your environmental education. The goal of this discussion is to have as many ideas as possible. So even though our instincts might to dive really deep into one idea, let's make sure we're just continuing to generate new ideas, right? That helps keep the discussion moving. But if my goal is something else, just like sharing that so people don't feel like upset if you cut them off and you're like, hey, that's a great discussion for later, but we're moving on, and different things like that. And then finally, for establishing ground rules, the JEDIA committee, which Tara is one of those folks, crafted some community agreements that you all can use, and they will be on display at the conference. And so the next two slides are going through those. And so Tara, if you want to explain some of these community agreements or how they'll show up in the conference space, that would be appreciated. Sure.
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. This is Tara again. The community agreements, excuse me, we're going to work better to share them in more obvious places this year than with last year, having them available in each space. And like Rachel said, the slides will be available. And if you want to use them in your slideshow or presentations, you can feel free to do that as well. The point of our community agreements were so that we would create as safe a space as possible where all folks can participate in any discussion related to JEDIA or otherwise openly and without fear. So some of the statements that fall under these agreements are, I will share from my own experiences. I will listen to understand, not to respond. I will respect the experience of others and the context they're founded in. I'll approach disagreement with curiosity, not argumentation. I'll make room for others to speak. I will ask permission to share stories and experiences learned and will maintain confidentiality. I will trust good intent and I will name impact. So sometimes when we share these agreements, we can just ask people to read through them on their own. I read them all out loud because I wanted all of us to hear them. We can ask for a show of thumbs. Where does everybody stand on this? If you have the time, you can ask a couple of people, again, outlining those guidelines and the goals for the reasons for asking the question. But is there one that stands out to you today that that really speaks to you in some way? So I will ask that of you all here. From all of these agreements, is there one that stands out to you? And you can respond either by unmuting or you can put it in the chat. Thank you, Rachel, for chatting that question. I see the admin office, Victoria, said, I will make room for others to speak.
The one that stands out to me, Tara, is the last one that says, I will trust good intent and I will name impact. And to share a story, last year, when I was at the front desk of the conference, a participant came up to me and named an impact that had happened during a conference presentation. And they were trusting good intent, but they're like, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but this is how I felt after that. And then some of us on the conference committee were able to go address that and talk to the other people involved to make sure that everyone walked away from that feeling heard and understood, but it also like would not happen again. And I think Tara was the one who had that conversation. So I appreciate you, Tara.
I did have it. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing that. Yes, it ended up being a very good conversation with the presenter, and we were able to rely on our community agreements to be able to say that the impact of what was shared didn't come across as intended. And we had a really good discussion about that and made some forward progress. Before we move on, would anyone like to share still any agreement that stands out to you?
Yes, I could just say that I like the wording. I don't just not presentation. It's something I've tried to communicate to my students.
Kendra, thank you for sharing. And it looks like also WA admin office did not understand what you said. It was very like, so I don't know if your microphone's off or what. No, it's not gotten any better. At one point though, I heard, I think I tried to share this with my students. And so maybe something along those lines, feel free to put in the chat if you would like your thoughts shared more.
While she's typing and Sheila wants to share, I think I gravitated towards the approach disagreement with curiosity, not argumentation. I feel like that's a life skill that many of us have to kind of work on of when we have that disagreement to ask questions and not be kind of defensive and ready to fight.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Ah,
That's what
there
Kendra
you go.
tried to say too. Thank you both. All right, I think we're ready to move on then, Rachel.
All right, we are going to talk a little bit about outdoor accessibility. So especially for this conference, if you are taking folks outside, scoping out the accessible routes is really important because a lot of us have probably not been to Beaver Creek before. And so you don't want to start going down a trail and then realize because it's wet and muddy or it's really steep that all of a sudden it doesn't meet the needs of your participants. And then also at the beginning, you can be like, hey, we are going to walk half a mile that way. The ground overall is gravelly, but pretty flat. And then because you've explained what's going on, people can choose if that outdoor option will work for them or if it won't work for them. That I know this isn't possible for everyone, but that can be a good reason to potentially have two presenters if you're going outside. One person could go down the path and one person could be in the back or staying behind with folks who can't necessarily go on that path. In the notes of this presentation, there is a link to the birdability checklist, which is access considerations. And they have a whole PDF here, which if you're like, I don't know how to decide if a route is accessible or not, this can talk about a lot of different things that maybe you have never considered before, right? So what is the distance of the trail? What kind of signage is on there? That might not be as helpful today. This says like parking. I know some of our field trips are going to different spaces and like, are there enough spaces for people with disabilities? Are there van accessible spots? What services are available? Like some places, if they don't have a bathroom, that's not going to be helpful to everyone. And so this can potentially be a really good way. But right here, trail surfaces, if you don't know what kind of different surfaces are called or who it might help or not help, this gives you more information. And so this is one of the things I would recommend checking out so you know exactly what information you want to communicate to your participants. The next one is facing participants when you're speaking. I know for me, like I said, I really need to see people's faces, and sometimes people are talking and they're like turning their head because they're pointing at something, which is naturally for us to do, but then all of a sudden your voice is being projected in a different way, and that might not work for your participants. So actually like thinking about it and practicing always facing your participants is something recommended. And then planning for alternatives. So if all of a sudden it's really cold and rainy, what are you going to do? If it's really muddy, what are you going to do? Do you have another person presenting with you? Different things like that. Is there anything in the chat I need to address? No, maybe not. Okay. So those are just some thoughts about outdoor accessibility. It was only one slide, but does anyone have any questions or comments before I go to the next section, which is what support WAEE will be providing all of you? All right. So WAEE has a variety of accessible equipment that will be available for folks. So we will have masks available for people if they feel like they need them to keep themselves safe, or if you are sick, we recommend that you wear it to keep others safe as well. Master Naturalist program has lent us some great outdoor equipment. So we will have hiking poles. And so if you're planning on going outside, having a few sets of those that people can borrow would be great. We will also have some outdoor speakers. So that way, if you're outside, your voice can be amplified. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I talk really loudly. I don't need the outdoor speaker. And the best recommendation is you should just use it. It will help save your voice from having to project so much, but also a speaker noise comes in at a different like wavelength that can often be easier for people to hear or understand. These speakers are also Bluetooth, so you could be in one spot speaking and the speaker could be in a different spot as well to help move it around the group. And then we'll also have these telescoping stools. So they're really small circles that can just be extended out for people to sit on. And so if you're going on a long walk or you're going to stop and talk, those can be helpful for folks who can't stand for quite as long. And so these will be at the welcome desk, most likely. Tara and I might have to make a plan to get them to field trips, but if you think you'll need them during your presentation because you're going outside, just come on up to the desk and we'll give you a set of this stuff. And then the other resource we are providing is that you can connect with us. So if you email me, Tara, Hannah, or Victoria, and you're like, I don't know how to do this activity in an accessible way, help me. Like, we will be there to help brainstorm or meet with you. I know last year I met with 2 presenters to help them out, and the year before it was 3. And so I'm very happy as well, even though my name's not there, to talk to all of you about your ideas and figure out how to do it in an accessible way. So this is the last slide before our discussion. And depending on how you're feeling, you can say it out loud or put it in the chat. But how do you commit to supporting accessibility and inclusion during the annual conference?
Thanks, Rachel. While you're thinking, this is Tara again. I wanted to point out in the chat that we dropped the link to the accessibility page on the WAEE website, because that lists those group agreements that we already went through. It also tells you how WAEE will hold ourselves accountable. It also has a little section on the presenter agreements. So even though some presenters might not be able to attend these accessibility and inclusion presentations, it is expected that all presenters will do their best to be as accessible and inclusive as possible.